Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. The sun was slowly setting behind the skyscrapers of Baltimore, tinting the sky with orange hues. In the hurrying crowd hurrying home, a man walked with measured steps, carrying a worn canvas bag in his hand. This man was Marcus Johnson, 42 years old, massive but straight figure, dark and calm gaze like steel. At first glance, he looked like any ordinary citizen: dark jeans, a leather jacket, short hair, a slightly graying beard. Nothing betrayed his past. But behind that quiet demeanor hid a life marked by rigor, blood, and discipline. Marcus was a former Marine. 12 years of service, missions in enemy territory he couldn't talk about, scars no medal had ever truly honored. After his military career, he had chosen silence over the spotlight, peace over glory. He had settled in a small neighborhood, occasionally helping young people get off the streets with the martial arts he had mastered to perfection. But that day, Marcus wasn't in the training room or a dojo. He had just withdrawn his savings, a substantial sum intended to cover his ailing mother's medical care. Every bill in that bag represented a sacrifice, a fight, a victory against poverty and injustice. Little did he know that before nightfall, that same bag would attract the greed of men who were supposed to protect the law. He didn't yet know that his composure would be tested, that his past as a soldier would emerge from the shadows. Because sometimes war isn't found on a distant battlefield. Sometimes it lurks in the very streets of the city we call home. And Marcus was about to find out. The sound of horns, broken conversations, hurried footsteps on the sidewalk, the city vibrated like it did at the end of every day. Marcus walked forward, his bag clutched to his chest. Through the canvas, he felt the weight of the bills, like a responsibility heavier than any weapon he had ever carried. He had only one thought in mind: to get home quickly, put the money on the table, and reassure his mother, whose fragile health constantly worried him. She had always been his pillar of strength, the one who had supported him when he was on the other side of the world, immersed in the horror of combat. As he crossed a quieter street, two uniformed figures stepped out of the shadows. Two police officers, nonchalant in appearance, but with that predatory gaze Marcus had learned to recognize at first glance. The first, tall, thin, with an angular jaw, wore a smile that boded ill. The second, stockier, was noisily chewing gum, his eyes fixed on Marcus's bag. "Good evening, sir, routine check," the tallest one said as he approached. Marcus stopped dead in his tracks. His soldier's instincts kicked in immediately. His senses analyzed the situation. The alley was deserted, the streetlights dimly lit, no cameras visible nearby. Everything seemed calculated. "Any problems, officer?" he asked in a calm but firm voice. "Just checking," the other man replied with a shrug. "You know, there's a lot of theft in this area. Show us what you're carrying." Their eyes focused on the bag. Marcus felt the tension rising, but he kept his composure. "These are my personal belongings," he replied. "I have my papers if you want to see them." But that wasn't what they wanted. Before he could even react, the stocky police officer snatched the bag from his hands. Marcus jerked, his body tense like a rope about to snap, but he held back. Using force against police officers, even corrupt ones, was like opening a door to a judicial hell. The tallest one opened the bag and pretended to be surprised when he discovered the bundles of bills. Well, he said with a predatory grin. "Looks like you're carrying a pretty penny. This doesn't sound very legal." "It's my money," Marcus replied, clenching his fists. "I just withdrew it from the bank." The gum clicked between the other's teeth. "In that case, you won't mind us keeping it as evidence until further clarification." Marcus felt a surge of anger burn in his chest. Everything inside him screamed to act, to break the invisible chains of this injustice. But he forced himself to breathe. His military training was not only based on strength, but also on self-control. Passers-by who had stopped watched the scene, wavering between indifference and concern. No one dared to intervene. The two police officers knew they had a clear field. One of them approached Marcus, took out a pair of handcuffs and whispered mockingly. "You have the right to remain silent, but no one will believe you anyway." That evening, in a dark alley, Marcus Johnson realized his peace had just collapsed. And that the war had just started again. The handcuffs snapped around Marcus's wrists with a sharp, metallic clang that echoed through the alleyway like a slap. Passers-by, who had been hurrying just seconds earlier, had stopped to watch the scene. Some discreetly took out their phones, hesitant to film. The stocky police officer yanked Marcus's arm roughly, as if he'd just arrested a dangerous criminal. The bag of money, now in their hands, disappeared into the back of their patrol vehicle parked a short distance away. "You are arrested on suspicion of money laundering and robbery," announced the tallest one with a sarcastic smile, loud enough for the onlookers to hear. A murmur ran through the small crowd. Stares grew heavy, some full of pity, others tinged with suspicion. For them, the image was clear: a handcuffed black man, surrounded by two police officers confident in their authority. The presumption of innocence was disappearing, replaced by the crushing weight of prejudice. Marcus clenched his jaw. Every fiber of his body urged him to fight back, to break those handcuffs like mere wire, to take down these two corrupt men in less than 10 seconds. He had the ability. His training, his reflexes, his discipline, everything was intact. But he remembered a phrase his sergeant had repeated to him in Afghanistan. The true warrior always chooses his battlefield. And tonight, Johnson, that battlefield is not yours. So he remained calm. But his eyes flashed. The policeman pushed him roughly toward the patrol car. A young boy in the crowd dared to ask. "But why are you arresting him? He didn't do anything." The stocky policeman stopped dead in his tracks, glared at the boy, and growled. "You worry, kid. He's a thief, just another one." Silence fell, heavy and icy. Marcus took a deep breath. This public humiliation burned in his chest far more than the handcuffs. Being treated like a criminal in front of his own community, it was an invisible, but deep wound. As they ushered him into the car, he gave the crowd one last look. His eyes said it all: remember this moment. It's not the end, it's just the beginning. The doors slammed, and the vehicle started. In the glow of the blue and red flashing lights, Marcus Johnson, a decorated former Marine, was now a prisoner. And no one yet knew that these police officers had just opened a Pandora's box. The patrol car drove at high speed, its flashing lights painting the city walls with blue and red reflections. Marcus, sitting in the back, his wrists bruised by the handcuffs, stared into space. Outside, passers-by filed by like shadows. Inside, the silence was broken only by the metallic creaking of the cage separating him from the two police officers. He could have shouted. He could have protested. But what would have been the point? His voice would have been lost in the din of the city and the sniggers of those two men. So Marcus closed his eyes. And immediately, the images of the past returned. The hot sand beneath his boots. The burning desert sky. The bursts of bullets whizzing overhead. His brothers in arms running alongside him, each aware that every second could be his last. He saw himself again, 25 years old, helmet screwed on, weapon in hand, his heart beating hard but disciplined. The deep voice of his captain still echoed in his memory. "Johnson, you were not trained to kill. You were trained to survive. To protect. Never forget that." It was this phrase that had kept him alive, in the devastated streets of Fallujah as in the humid jungles of South America. He also remembered close-quarters combat, when bullets were no longer an option. His hands, his body, his breath, everything was a weapon. Martial arts, Krav Maga, military jiu-jitsu, he had been forged as a precision instrument. But that memory, in the police car, wasn't one of pride. It was of pain. Because after surviving the enemy, he found himself humiliated, handcuffed, by those who once wore the same uniform as him, those who had sworn to protect the innocent. His eyes opened slowly. The reflection of his face appeared in the glass. His tired features, his deep wrinkles, spoke only one truth: the battlefield had never truly left him. The voice of the tall, thin policeman pulled him from his thoughts. "So, friend, how does it feel to be on the wrong side of the law?" A cruel smile played on his lips, but Marcus didn't respond. He simply stared into her eyes through the rearview mirror. A cold, impenetrable gaze, that of a man who had already seen death in the face, and who had never been afraid of it. A slight shiver ran through the policeman in spite of himself. Without knowing why, he looked away. Marcus, however, remained silent. But deep inside him, a truth burst forth with the force of an explosion. "You think you broke me? You don't know who I am yet." The slam of the heavy metal door echoed through the corridor like a sentence. Marcus was pushed into a cramped cell with cracked walls and the smell of damp and cheap disinfectant. The flickering fluorescent lights cast a dim light that made the place even more sinister. He stood up, his handcuffs finally removed, and scanned the room. Inside, 3 other men were already waiting, each sitting on a cement bench attached to the wall. They looked up as he entered, staring at him in silence. The first was a young Latino, no more than 20 years old, with a swollen face and a swollen eye. The second, an older black man, wore a rumpled suit, his glasses askew. The third, a white homeless man with a sunken face, watched Marcus with a mixture of curiosity and weariness. Marcus sat down, his back straight, his hands clasped. He didn't need to speak, his mere bearing already inspired a certain authority. Yet the silence was broken by the young Latino. "Did they get you too?" he asked hoarsely. Marcus turned his head towards him. "What are you talking about?" The young man gave a bitter smile. "The 2 cops. The tall one and the one who chews gum all the time. They busted me last night. They found $50 on me, they said it was dealing evidence. Result, 1 night here, and probably trumped-up charges." The man in the suit spoke, his voice trembling but clear. "For me, it was 3 days ago. I own a small phone repair shop. They came, supposedly for inspection. They took my day's cash, almost $600. When I protested, they took me away." He adjusted his glasses with trembling fingers. "They do this all the time. And no one stops them." The homeless man snorted, a bitter, tired laugh. "Welcome to the club, Marine." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "How do you know who I am?" "Your look," replied the homeless man. "I served in the Navy too. You can always recognize an old hand. And I also recognize the anger you're holding back." Marcus remained silent. But his fists clenched in spite of himself. He now understood the magnitude of the problem. This wasn't just an isolated abuse. These police officers had turned their badges into a tool of racketeering, destroying lives with impunity. The young Latino leaned forward. "So, what are you going to do, soldier?" All eyes focused on Marcus. His face remained impassive, but deep inside him, something had just ignited. A spark he had been trying to extinguish for years. He slowly raised his head and said in a deep voice, "I'm going to do what I've always done, fight. But this time, it will be for all of us." Silence fell again in the cell. But it was no longer a silence of resignation. It was the one that precedes a storm. Night had fallen on the police station. Silence reigned in the cell, broken only by the light snores of the homeless man and the ragged breathing of the young Latino who had finally fallen asleep, exhausted. The man in the suit remained motionless, sitting in a corner, as if in silent prayer. Marcus, meanwhile, couldn't sleep. He sat with his back pressed against the cold wall, his eyes open in the gloom. His thoughts swirled violently, like a storm about to break. Everything he'd endured in his life, war, hunger, fear, the loss of comrades, had forged a steely mentality. But what he was experiencing tonight had a different flavor. It was an injustice that came from within, from those who wore the uniform not to serve, but to destroy. And that, Marcus couldn't accept. He thought of his sick mother waiting for him at home. He thought of the money that should have covered her care, now in the hands of those crooked police officers. A dull, burning anger rose within him. But this anger didn't translate into agitation. On the contrary, the more his rage grew, the colder, more methodical his mind became. He remembered what his instructors kept repeating. A soldier loses the battle when he acts out of anger. But when he transforms that anger into strategy, he becomes invincible. Marcus took a deep breath, closed his eyes for a moment, and visualized every detail: the guard's shifts, the keys jingling with each entry, the creaking of the metal door, the position of the cameras he'd spotted upon entering. Each observation was recorded in his mind like a tactical map. He was no longer the prisoner. He was becoming the Marine again. At that moment, he made his decision. He wouldn't stand by, helpless. He wouldn't wait for a corrupt lawyer or an indifferent judge to decide his fate. No. He was going out. And he was going to put an end to this charade. He opened his eyes and stared into the darkness. His jaw clenched. His body, despite the years, still vibrated with the discipline and strength of yesteryear. The old man in the suit, who hadn't slept a wink, stared at him silently. He whispered softly, as if he had guessed what was going on in Marcus's mind. "You're going to do something, aren't you?" Marcus didn't answer right away. Then, in a deep, low voice, he simply said, "Yes." At that moment, fate had changed. The next day, this cell would no longer be a place of humiliation. It would be the starting point of a silent revolt. The crackling fluorescent sign above the cell was the only source of light. Midnight had just struck somewhere in the station, and the place seemed asleep. The corridor was silent except for the steady footsteps of a guard making his rounds. Marcus remained seated against the wall, his eyes closed, breathing slowly. But his mind was alert. Every noise, every vibration of the floor, every jingle of a key was etched into his mind like the beat of a war drum. The moment arrived. The policeman on duty, a giant yawning with boredom, walked past the cell. His keys hung from his belt, making a metallic clang. Marcus opened his eyes, analyzed his trajectory, his rhythm, the position of his weapon. Everything was calculated. The policeman stopped in front of the gate, casting a distracted glance. "So, guys, are you asleep?" he sneered. No one answered. The other inmates feigned sleep. Only Marcus stared at him. "And you, the tough guy," the policeman said, pointing at him. "Don't make that face, tomorrow you'll have a judge to play the hero." Marcus slowly straightened, approaching the bars. His massive shadow loomed in the dim light. "Come closer," he said in a low, firm voice. The policeman burst out laughing. "What? You want to scare me?" He approached in defiance. Fatal error. In a split second, Marcus grabbed his wrist through the bars and pulled with inhuman force. The policeman hit the railings head-on, his forehead smacking against the metal. Before he could scream, Marcus had already disarmed him with a sharp motion, the baton ripped from his belt. The Colossus staggered, groggy, and Marcus landed a precise blow to his temple. The man collapsed in a heap, unconscious. The keys clinked as they slid to the floor. The other inmates sat up abruptly, their eyes wide. The young Latino whispered, mouth agape. "Shit." Marcus inserted the key into the lock and opened the cell. The creak echoed through the deserted corridor. He signaled to the others. "Get out." "But, they're going to shoot us," hesitated the man in the suit. "Marcus fixes it." "Not if you stay behind me." He moved forward, his steps silent, his body tense like a living weapon. Every gesture was controlled, every movement precise. He was no longer a prisoner. He had become what he had always been, an elite soldier. They crossed the corridor, their footsteps muffled by the dusty floor. At each corner, Marcus strained his ears, anticipating sounds. His breathing was slow, his gaze sharp. When a second guard appeared around the corner, Marcus reacted like a shadow. 2 quick steps, a grab for the shoulder, a blow to the solar plexus, then a silent choke. The guard collapsed without a sound. The young Latino looked at him as if he were seeing a ghost. You're not human, man." Marcus didn't answer. His eyes, hard as steel, were fixed on the exit. The police station was still asleep. But soon, the silence of the night would be broken. And Marcus Johnson was ready for anything. The police station exit was only a few meters away. Marcus moved with the precision of a predator, his senses on high alert, escorting the 3 other inmates who followed him like shadows. But he knew it wouldn't be that simple. The men he was looking for, the ones who had humiliated and robbed him, were still out there. Fate took care of it. Turning into a wider corridor, he spotted them. The 2 corrupt police officers. One tall, with an angular jaw, and the other, stocky, chewing his eternal gum. They were talking near a desk, Marcus's bag lying on the table, half open, revealing the neatly lined up wads of bills. The sight of that money, stolen from his ailing mother, made Marcus's blood boil. His fingers tightened around the baton he still held. His heartbeat quickened, but his breathing remained calm and disciplined. Well, the tall man breathed, noticing his silhouette emerging from the shadows. There's our hero. The stocky man snickered, spitting his gum onto the ground. Looks like you've lost your way, Marine. Marcus moved forward, his steps heavy and silent. Behind him, the other inmates froze, stunned. They understood they were witnessing a moment that would go beyond a simple settling of scores. That money, Marcus whispered, his deep voice echoing in the hallway. Give it back. Now. The tall man burst out laughing. Do you think you're still on a battlefield? Here, we make the law. Marcus tilted his head slightly, his gaze piercing. Then it's time someone reminded you what the real law is. The stocky man pulled out his baton, cracking it against his palm. Oh, trust me, we'll remind you of your place. They lunged almost simultaneously. But Marcus was no ordinary man. He moved with blinding speed, dodging the first blow like a shadow, striking with a precise circular motion that sent the stocky man slamming into the wall. The air escaped his lungs with a muffled groan. The tall man tried to grab Marcus, but Marcus spun around, grabbed him by the wrist, and with one swift movement, knocked him to the ground. The technique was perfect, a mix of military jiu-jitsu and brute force. The policeman went down, his weapon skittering on the tiles. You are not men of the law, you are parasites, Marcus growled, his voice echoing like thunder. The dazed stocky man tried to get up, but Marcus landed a precise kick to his torso, sending him rolling against a table. The other struggled on the ground, but Marcus placed his knee on his chest and incapacitated him with a painful lock. The inmates stared, mouths agape. The young Latino whispered. It's not a man. It's a weapon. When silence finally fell, the 2 police officers lay on the ground, panting, unable to get up. Marcus slowly retrieved his bag, clutched it, and stood up. His eyes flashed. He hadn't just taken back his money. He had just shown these men what true justice was. But that was only the beginning. Outside, another fight awaited him, that of the truth. Night shrouded the abandoned warehouse like a dark veil. The concrete floor reflected the flickering neon lights, creating shifting shadows that seemed to dance in time with the wind. Marcus crouched in the shadows, his muscles tense, watching the corrupt police officers' every move. His bag, stuffed with counterfeit bills and spyware, waited patiently on a dusty pallet. The officers arrived, confident, laughing among themselves as if they were the masters of the world. The tall, stocky man, accompanied by 2 other colleagues, approached the bag, whispering plans for their next robberies. Every word, every burst of laughter was captured by the hidden microphones and cameras, connected to Daniel, the journalist, and the prosecutor who were monitoring the scene live. We'll make a good sum tonight, the stocky man murmured, rummaging through the bag. Ha! And that Marine, he didn't understand that we're playing in a different league, sneered the tall one. Marcus inhaled slowly, focused. Then, in a split second, he emerged from the shadows. His footsteps were silent, but his imposing presence stopped the police officers in their tracks. "Looks like the party's over, gentlemen," he said coldly. The stocky man instinctively reached for his baton, but Marcus leaped forward, disarmed him with a precise gesture, and knocked him to the ground. The tall man tried to attack him from behind, but Marcus pivoted and used a flawless armlock that sent the man collapsing with a muffled scream. The other two officers drew their firearms, but Marcus, anticipating every move thanks to his military training, took cover behind an old metal crate. Bullets whistled around him, but he didn't panic. Every breath was calculated, every movement strategic. With a leap, he incapacitated the first with a spinning kick, then brought the second down with a series of masterful jiu-jitsu holds. The officers lay on the ground, panting and defeated, while Marcus retrieved the bag and made sure the bugs remained active. Silence fell again. The scene, filmed live, now showed the faces of these corrupt men, confessing their crimes and humiliations. Marcus knelt down, picked up a wad of counterfeit bills, and threw it to the ground, looking at the police officers with a mixture of anger and absolute calm. "You thought you could take advantage of anyone, but you didn't know you were up against someone who never lets himself be broken." Outside, the first light of dawn was beginning to break. At that moment, Marcus knew the world was about to see the truth. The corrupt police had just lost their mask, and the video, already shared by Daniel, was spreading like wildfire on social media. It was no longer just a personal victory. It was a revelation for the whole city. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, cameras, and curious citizens had crowded in as soon as the doors opened. Marcus's face, calm but determined, appeared on every screen in the room. Every step he took echoed like a signal. This was no longer just another former Marine, this was a man bringing the truth to the public and to justice. The two corrupt policemen, handcuffed and escorted by honest officers this time, were pale and tense. The murmurs of the crowd underscored the stark contrast between the humiliation they had inflicted and Marcus's dignity. The judge entered, imposing silence with a simple rap of the gavel. "We begin the Johnson case against the police officers." Marcus's lawyer, a charismatic black woman named Angela Carter, spoke confidently. "Your Honor, we will prove that these officers abused their power, stole money from an honest citizen, and attempted to discredit him through their racist and corrupt behavior. The evidence is irrefutable." She pointed to the screen behind her. The warehouse video, filmed live by Marcus and Daniel, appeared. The officers were clearly identified, their involuntary confessions and brutal actions captured from every angle. The audience held their breath. Murmurs turned to gasps, the proof was undeniable. The Attorney General, also present, added, "These images show a serious and repeated abuse of power. We will seek an exemplary sentence to ensure justice is served and public confidence in the police is restored." The police officers, trying to justify themselves, stammered out weak and incoherent excuses. Marcus sat calmly, observing every gesture, every movement, his military background and tactical training having taught him to analyze humans under pressure. He felt neither hatred nor fear, only a cold determination to see justice done. The witnesses, including the young Latino, the man in the suit, and the homeless man, were called to the stand. Each courageously recounted the injustice they had suffered, strengthening Marcus's case. The entire room felt the gravity of the situation. Finally, the judge stood up to deliver his verdict. After reviewing the evidence and testimony, this court finds the defendants guilty of theft, abuse of power, and violation of civil rights. The sentences will be severe, as a reminder that no one is above the law. A respectful silence followed. Then, with a barely audible murmur, the room erupted in applause. Marcus stood slowly, his face marked but serene. Justice had been served. This trial was not just a personal victory. It had become a symbol. A reminder that courage, discipline, and perseverance could triumph, even in the face of the most entrenched corruption. And for Marcus Johnson, it wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a new fight, to protect his community and ensure that no one else would go through what he had experienced. A few weeks after the trial, the city seemed to breathe a lighter air. Newspapers, television stations, and social media were all about Marcus Johnson, the former Marine who had become a symbol of justice and courage. But Marcus wasn't looking for fame or honor. He had been reunited with his mother, welcoming her with a meaningful smile. The stolen tickets had been returned, and with them, some of the peace of mind Marcus had thought lost forever. His mother, moved to tears, hugged him. "You gave me more than money, Marcus," she whispered. "You gave me back my dignity." But Marcus knew that the most important thing wasn't the material reward. It was the fact that he had turned injustice into an example, showing that even in the face of corrupt institutions, a determined man could make a difference. In the following weeks, he decided to put his experience and skills to use in the community. He opened a martial arts and discipline training center for the neighborhood's youth, teaching not only combat, but also self-confidence, respect, and the importance of justice. His former brothers-in-arms came regularly to give lectures and share their experiences, inspiring a new generation to be strong, but fair. One evening, Marcus stood outside the center's main hall. The young people looked at him with admiration and respect. He smiled softly, thinking back on his past, the war, the injuries, the betrayal, the humiliation, everything had led to this moment. He was no longer just a former Marine. He had become a mentor, a leader, a symbol of resilience and courage. And as the sun set over the city, his eyes shone with the same determination he had always carried. He knew there were more battles ahead, but he would face them with the same discipline, intelligence, and inner strength that had made him who he was today. Justice had triumphed, but above all, the man he had become could finally live in peace.